pirates, yes, they robbed by. Sold I to the merchant ships. Minutes after they took I.
Welcome to Africa,
From the bottomless pit,
land of the slaves, home of the oppressed. I am Conscious Ankh,
we
and this is the bigger picture.
triumph.
Today we're looking at a very sensitive subject,
Won't you help to sing
the problem with Africa.
the songs of freedom?
We are looking at our leaders.
Ever had
You know, as the saying goes,
them,
if the head fails to work, the body suffers. For centuries, we have been suffering as a continent,
cause none but us.
and I always blame the leadership. Some people will say, why not blame the people? I mean, the ordinary people. Well, we all have our parts to play, but our leaders, they are in charge. So we have to blame them first. Remember, if the head fails to work, the body suffers. The problem with Africa. Today we're looking at our leaders. Just this past week, a large number of African heads of state, if not all of them, a very large number, went to China to sell the continent. Yes, they want to sell the continent for money. Money that you and I will not have a share in. And they've been doing this for centuries. I mean, our leaders. A couple of centuries ago, my forefathers and your forefathers sold our own brothers into slavery. They invited the white people in. They invited the Americans and the Europeans in. I mean, they were already knocking at our doors. And our leaders, being the greedy people they have always been, invited them in and sold our own brothers into slavery. It didn't end there. They also helped them to establish their presence on our soil. Today, as I speak, we're still feeling the presence of our foreign oppressors today. So many heads of states, African heads of states, went to China this past week for a conference or whatever they call it. And we all know they went there for money. I heard they've been promised a huge sum of money. And they are talking about some partnership, whatever they call it. But we know it's just money that they went there for. So they went there to solicit for money. The problem with Africa, our leaders, if the head fails to work, the body suffers. And we have been suffering for such a long time, thanks to our leaders.
By the hand of the Almighty, we forward in this generation triumphantly.
So, you know, they were promised a very large sum of money. And we know that this money is not going to be used for any project or anything that will benefit you and I. We know that they are going to use a very tiny fraction of it to do some projects here and there. And the rest of the money will be unaccounted for. it's a sad thing. Why do our leaders always go begging for money? Why is Africa always begging for money? I'm not trying to tarnish our image as Africans. I mean, there are bad leaders everywhere globally. There are bad citizens everywhere globally. But African leaders seem to be the champions when it comes to corrupt leadership. If there was a global tournament or a World Cup for corrupt leaders, I think our leaders will always be the champions. The problem with Africa, bad leadership.
Sold I to the merchant ships, Venus after they took I.
So, as I was saying a couple of centuries ago, our forefathers did the same thing. And today we are still feeling the presence of our oppressors centuries ago. We speak their language. We worship their deities. We have adopted a lot of their culture into our system. We are practically living like them. We have abandoned our own culture and tradition. This is Africa. It's a sad thing. So back in the day, the Europeans and the Americans, they came here and took their fair share of the continent. And even when the slave trade was abolished, they made sure that it continues somehow. So, like I said, they established their presence here. And they made sure that the system always favors them. So even today, they are not coming here to buy slaves. We are going to them. We are going in our numbers. So you hear of these US visa lottery, the Canadian visa lottery, and whatever. There's a lot of these stowaways, people crossing the desert, people crossing the sea illegally to go work abroad. Another form of slavery. So they put things in place back then just to make sure that there comes a time when they wouldn't have the need to come here and buy people, but rather people from our continent will have to go to them to labor just like the slaves. It's a sad thing. The problem with Africa, bad leadership. Share this link, spread the word.
Won't you help to sing?
Someone will say, don't talk about it. It's Africa. This is our land. You are talking about our people like that. Listen, we have to talk about it. If nobody addresses this issue, things will keep happening this way for centuries to come. We always talk about it and whine about it, and we don't really look into ways to curtail the problem. But there is a way to curtail the problem, and I'm not talking about an uprising. Violence wouldn't solve the problem. There are ways, more effective ways to deal with this situation. And hopefully in our next live session or in the next video, I will talk about those ways. But for now, I just want to address the issue. I want us to acknowledge the problem, the causes or the cause of the problem. And I'm always going to blame the leadership. Like I said, if the head fails to work, the body suffers. And now we are suffering. We have been suffering for centuries. The problem with Africa, bad leadership.
From the bottomless pit, my hand was made strong
Thank you for joining. Please share the link.
by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this jam.
So it used to be the Europeans and the Americans,
triumph.
and now it is the Chinese.
You help to
I mean, they've been doing this for a while. They literally have a huge share in this continent. And in case you didn't know, this continent is a business venture. The Americans have a share in it. The Europeans have a share in it. And now the Chinese have a very huge share in it as well.
enter slavery.
And they keep buying more and more shares. So recently, as our leaders went over there to beg for money, to solicit for money, or whatever it is they went there to do, they just went there to sell more shares of our continent to them. So don't be surprised if you see Chinese people all over the continent tomorrow establishing illegal businesses or whatever kind of businesses they want and doing whatever they please because they own the continent. It has been sold and paid for. They have bought it from our leaders. Our leaders have sold the continent to them. So you keep wondering, what do they do with all that money? All the money they've been taking from the IMF and the World Bank, and now the Chinese government. What do they do with all that money? I mean, combine all the infrastructure in Africa, all the infrastructure, all the roads and bridges and whatnot, and just do your calculation. The amount invested in this infrastructure is nowhere near the money our governments have borrowed from the IMF and the World Bank and the Chinese government. So they go there, they take all that money, they come and squander it and spend only a tiny fraction on infrastructure. They spend only a tiny fraction of it on projects. And that's it. The problem with Africa: bad leadership.
From mental slavery, 'cause none but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear of atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets?
Let us just acknowledge the fact that our leaders are the main issue. So the question is, how do we deal with this issue? Like I said, violence wouldn't solve the problem. So what other method can we employ to make sure that things begin to change for good and in our favor? Thanks for watching. This is the bigger picture. And today, I only presented the issue we are facing, the major issue, or one of the major issues we are facing as a continent, which is the bad leadership we have. Next week, we're going to look at ways to curtail this problem. Remember to join me for that episode. Thanks once again for joining. I am Conscious Ank. The program comes your way same time next week. Bye for now.
Won't you help to sing this song?